Hi, my name is Juan, and in this lesson we're going to learn about an English colony in what is now present-day United States. Let's go explore Plymouth. This story begins with a group of people known as the Pilgrims. The Pilgrims were a group of Protestant Christians who wanted to be free or separate from the Church of England and therefore became known as separatists. Many had been treated harshly by King James for not worshipping the way he wanted them to. After a brief period in Holland, 150 colonists set out for the New World to seek a place where they could worship freely. While still aboard their ship, the Mayflower, 41 men signed an agreement called the Mayflower Compact, where they agreed to follow just and equal laws that their representatives would write up for them to follow. This was the first written framework of government in the colonies. The Pilgrims were aiming for present-day Virginia, but instead, in 1620, accidentally arrived on the coast of present-day Massachusetts. Oops! If you live on the east coast of the United States, you may know that Massachusetts gets quite a bit colder in the winter than Virginia. And like other colonies we've discussed in previous lessons, the Pilgrims did not bring much food or many farm animals. I guess they hadn't heard much about Jamestown Colony's starving time. The group of native people who occupied this area of present-day Massachusetts when the Pilgrims arrived were the Wampanoag people. Wampanoag people had lived in this area for thousands of years and consisted of a nation made up of 69 villages scattered across the area we now refer to as New England. The Wampanoags were skilled hunters, gatherers, farmers, and fishers during the area's warmer spring and summer months. In the colder months, the Wampanoags would move inland from shore to more protected shelter. While the Wampanoags did not have private property, they did have community property. There were boundaries of where their people's land started and ended in the area. At least two, and maybe more, Wampanoags spoke English at the time when the Pilgrims arrived. They were called Tisquantum, or his English name Squanto, and Samoset. You may be wondering, how did these two native men already know the English language when the Pilgrims arrived in the area? Records show us that prior to the Pilgrims arriving in Massachusetts, British fishermen traveled through the area and stormed Native American towns, kidnapping native people to sell in the slave trade, including Tisquantum and Samoset. During their time in captivity, they both learned English, then eventually escaped and returned to their tribe. Due to kidnappings, severe illness, and battles with other tribes, the Wampanoag had been weakened. Therefore, to keep them protected, their chief, Usamequin, sought to form an alliance with the Pilgrims. The Pilgrims were having their own sets of troubles in the New World. Like other settlers before them, during the first winter most of the Pilgrims died, but not all. The only reason being that Tisquantum traded food for weaponry with the Pilgrims. The Wampanoags needed weaponry to protect their land from the Narragansett people. And for this brief moment in history, the interests of the Pilgrims and Wampanoags aligned. You can imagine what it might have been like for the Pilgrims to move to a foreign land, to be very hungry, but without any knowledge about the plants and animals they were able to eat. After the first long winter, Tisquantum showed the Pilgrims crops that they could plant and harvest. By late summer 1621, the Pilgrims had produced a bountiful supply of food. This food saved the Pilgrims from starvation. The Pilgrims invited the Wampanoags to celebrate their first harvest of the indigenous foods in October of 1621, an event now celebrated as Thanksgiving Day. But here is something that you may not know about Thanksgiving. After that first feast, the Thanksgiving celebration would not be considered an official holiday for over 200 years. It was not until October of 1863 that then President Abraham Lincoln announced that Thanksgiving would be celebrated as a national holiday on the fourth Thursday of every November. Unfortunately, peace between the Pilgrims and the Wampanoags did not last long. When the Pilgrims came to the Americas and bought land from the Wampanoags initially assumed that the Pilgrims were buying into Wampanoag country, not that they were buying Wampanoag country out from under their feet. But the goal of the Pilgrims was to take over the Wampanoags' land, which led to the King Philip's War from 1675 until 1678. The Wampanoag people basically said, "Enough is enough. You can't take away our land." The conflict devastated the Wampanoags and forever shifted the balance of power in favor of European colonists. Wampanoags today remember the Pilgrims' entry to their homeland as a day of deep mourning rather than a time to give thanks. Let's review and reflect. As we've learned in previous lessons, perspective, or one's point of view, is a very important part of learning about history. What do you think the arrival of the Pilgrims may have felt like from the Wampanoags' perspective? What have you learned in this lesson that helps support your answer? Now, let's flip our perspective. What do you think the arrival to Plymouth felt like for the Pilgrims? Again, what have you learned in this lesson that helps support your answer? If you've been keeping notes, write down your answer before moving on. It's time to practice what you learn about the Plymouth colony. And remember, stay curious and keep exploring. You never know what you may discover.
Hey, hey.